Welcome to the Biotech Startups Podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi.
My guest today is Michael Antonov, founder and CEO of Deep Origin. Deep Origin is helping scientists solve disease and extend health span by building tools that simplify R&D, simulate biology, and untangle the complexity of life. Michael is a highly accomplished serial entrepreneur and software architect. Before founding Deep Origin, he co-founded two companies that were both successfully acquired: Scaleform, which was acquired by Autodesk, and Oculus, which was acquired by Facebook. At Oculus, he led development of the PC runtime and SDK for DK1, DK2, and the Oculus Rift. He also started the web VR team, which shipped the Carmel browser and React VR, and contributed to CAF2 and PyTorch as part of the Facebook AI team. Prior to that, at Scaleform, he led development of his GFX product line, a GPU-accelerated graphics and UI toolkit used in major games across PC, console, and mobile. The software enables seamless playback of Flash content inside game engines and became the industry standard for in-game user interfaces. In addition to his experience in software, Michael is also an investor and the founder of Formic Ventures, which makes early-stage investments in biotech startups focused on human longevity, as well as technology startups and companies that make human lives more meaningful. With deep experience in VR, AI, and developer tools, Michael brings a unique perspective to building software for life sciences, making this a conversation you won't want to miss. Over the next 4 episodes, Michael shares how his experience in gaming, VR, and entrepreneurship shaped his approach to solving challenges in biotech R&D. Throughout the series, he reflects on building Oculus, navigating large organizations like Facebook, and transitioning into biotech investing and company building. He also discusses founding Deep Origin, the importance of biological simulation, and his mission to create tools that empower researchers and accelerate scientific discovery. Today, we're diving into Michael's early years growing up in Russia, his family's deep roots in biology, and the pivotal experiences that shaped his path in technology and entrepreneurship. He shares what it was like moving to the United States after the collapse of the Soviet Union, how scarcity and resourcefulness shaped his mindset, and why discovering computers at a young age changed everything. We'll also explore how programming became a creative outlet, what ultimately pulled him towards computer science instead of biology, and how early projects in high school and college laid the foundation for his future companies. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Biotech Startups Podcast. Michael, so good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great to see you again, John.
As we always, get prepared for, our conversations, we always like to take it all the way back to really just figure out what were these pivotal moments that got you inspired to pursue business, pursue science, and honestly just figure out how you have reached your current business philosophy and leadership style. So take us all the way back. What was it like growing up and what got you into science?
Thank you again for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about this in the industry. I love being biotech, but to be honest, when I was young, I did not at all expect to be in technology or especially specifically in biotech. I was actually growing up in Russia. The very end of Soviet times, when they had what was called perestroika, when basically Soviet Union collapsed, and then was capitalism. And I caught the last literally 3 years of that. I was a teenager back then, and we moved to United States in 1993. So growing up, there's a few themes which we had. One is shortage of money. And it was fairly common because the level of life was, not quite what we're used to, also essentially during the fall of the Soviet Union, there was shortage of all kinds of food and everything. Now, my parents and grandparents were very resourceful. Actually, I had a farmhouse which I could go to and spend every summer, and then they were growing all kinds of foods and vegetables, so we could have those in winter. And my stepdad was working an extra job, so he was actually a biologist. Everybody in my family, remarkably, is a biologist. So it was like a turnaround circle for me. I ended up on this, but I completely didn't expect to be. I'll talk about that a bit more later. But my stepdad was actually working as a taxi in the evening, returning from job for a few hours to make extra money, because often the institutes in those years they would either pay very little, but beyond that, there literally were huge gaps and people just wouldn't get paid for months. So I grew up in a family, and if you think about Russia and the culture, I think we're kind of somewhat critical people in many ways. It could be a little bit grim and very realistic. So I'm used to kind of that environment, which has been very analytical and focused and practical in many ways. So that has affected me and probably shaped a lot of how I look at the world and engineering before moving to the United States. So, and after moving to United States, I went to high school in Maryland, ultimately went to University of Maryland, College Park. And it was a big transition because just the school was different, the way classes are set up. And my ultimate kind of interest, when I was young, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but kind of early on in America, I got interested in computers and programming after seeing them a lot and kind of went into that area. So that was sort of my young years.
Interesting. And did you know, I'm trying to imagine kind of like what the dinner table talk was. Was your dad talking about biology, or was there like no pressure? It's like, Michael, whatever you're interested in, you can pursue? Or was there a little bit of a nudge, I know you'll eventually come back to biology?
No, I think there was no expectation or sort of that. My parents would have random biological conversations, and also my dad was, in neuroscience. So it's a lot of that type of conversation I could hear. But for me, I kind of just didn't relate to it so much. I early on, there was this moment when I was 13 where one of a family friends brought a computer, which was at that time, it was like Spectrum was like a keyboard you can plug into the TV and you use cassettes to load a program. And it had a few games and it had this basic interpreter. And I really liked games. It was just so fascinating. And then I could learn and write simple statements and logic. So that was like a little precursor. And then we had to return that computer because it was really temporary loan for a couple months. So I couldn't program or do anything for a while, maybe until 2 or 3 years later on a calculator in high school. But I got very interested into all electronics and all technology was something really exciting for me. And also there was shortage of that in the kind of old Soviet world because just having a cassette would be for music was like a significant, financial ownership. You can have only a few. But no, so I had a cassette player just for the Walkman, and that was like a big deal. So, anything electronics, anything computers excited me. And biology was something I would hear about, but not really pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, and I can empathize with that experience too, because I think the first time you start playing games as a kid, you're just like, this is amazing. This is actually amazing. And but for me, I kind of had an opposite kind of experience where I was like, I'm going to figure out how to program. And I was like, man, I'm really bad at programming. So I was like, I kind of gave that up and I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to go do biology. But it's cool that you had an early exposure to that. And I would imagine as you got to the University of Maryland and growing up, doing high school in Maryland too, you probably had, exposure. There's probably computers that you were able to get your hands on and start really, getting more involved. Was that the case for you when you started getting into high school and during your early university years?
Yes, that was really when I went to high school in Maryland and they had these old Macs. And I think it had Oregon Trail in it, which is this old game where
you just died of dysentery.
Yes,
you're dead.
You find all these different things to do to save your people along the way. And you cross a river and somebody could just drown.
Yeah.
But that was fascinating to me. And then I started coding a little bit. There was this language called HyperCard there. But for me, I found it as a very creative outlet. So like the real world, you can probably control so little, but in that programming world, you can be there's like no limits. It felt like, and any limit you can sort of work through, and it's very logical. That really appealed to me. So I saw it as a very creative medium. So, and it's interesting. There was a curious phrase my parents would say, and I think that probably stuck with me because they would look at my software things and my excitement for computers, and they would say something along the lines of, this is so trivial, like one cell is way complicated than a spaceship. And it is certainly true. So it stuck with me, but it had kind of like two effects. Yeah. I think right now it has stuck with me all my life. And now that I think about simulations and I realize how true it is. But back then it had this effect of, well, this computer stuff is very empowering. We can like learn and do it. In my lifetime, it'll make a big difference and I could do it. And biology will just not be solved. So there, I'm going to get computers. So I think that was my logic.
I could put myself in your shoes, and I actually like, sometimes when you're thinking about like biological problems, you're like, holy crap. It's kind of this thing where you're like, exactly what you're describing, kind of like computers being this like, we made computers, so it's kind of this thing where we can like understand it better, but we're like in nature, we're just living in nature, and like biology is biology, and it's like this, we're just like I always think about it as like you're almost like in a forest with a machete, and you're just trying to cut through the forest and figure out if you're moving in the right direction. Oftentimes you never know. You're just like, my gut tells me that this is the right direction to be moving in. So now you're at university, and you obviously, it sounds like you got your hand on some early Oregon Trail and some Macs. Talk a little bit about your decision to pursue a degree in computer science, and kind of what was that kind of undergraduate experience like for you?
My learning in programming actually started in high school. So when I saw those computers, there's two things which happened. First, I did not really have a computer at home. So kind of first couple of years, we had very little money. We moved as immigrants in the States. So I would ask my parents for a computer and say, no, we don't have any money. I would repeat, every couple of weeks. But the good thing is those computers didn't work. I could stay after class. So I would stay after class. I think maybe school ended 2:15. I would stay till like 4, an hour or two extra every day, just in a computer class, and I would just do my own thing. So I learned there for the first 2 years. And ultimately, my grandmother from Russia came and she gave me a few $100 to literally buy a floor sample, which was like a year behind from Montgomery Ward. So I had this first computer at home. And then I had a lot less reasons to actually stay, cool. Yeah. But the kind of key thing which I learned, I didn't have a lot of games. So I would switch to programming my own stuff. So I learned graphics. I started writing in C. I would go to like libraries and get books and like maybe write notes. And I wrote my own graphics library for games, and I made games. So by the time I was in college, I've been programming in C and in assembly language. I was actually writing something called DOS Extender, which is a small operating system. And this was for about a year before getting into college. So an interesting thing when I went to college is meant a few things. First of all, I knew programming at the level that I didn't really feel I needed college. So I was probably a little bit even too optimistic about my capabilities.
Yeah.
At the same time, I didn't know certain things one might want to know in industry. So for example, I did graphics. I would know nothing about, say, databases, which is a common thing, or I wouldn't know about the logic of proofs. So computer science has a real science component to it.
Yeah.
So one example of what something you learn is algorithmic complexity, like how, there's like this squared, or whether it's an exponential algorithms. Those kind of things make often more difference than just like the performance multiplier.
Yeah.
But that type of stuff and proofs, I think it was hard. Like, so I would literally have 3-week project, which I would do last day in like 5 hours, submit. So they had to like the digital system, you can submit before 12 a.m. So I would literally submit it like 11:50.
Yeah.
I would get it done in like 3 or 4 hours because the program, I didn't do any, like I basically could program whatever I wanted. But some of the more, like when they gave me an exam and say, prove this thing, I would come up with two things. It's either too obvious, so why do I have to prove something so dumb logic?
Yeah.
Or the other side of it is if it's not too obvious, there usually is that I don't care. Like you try to make me prove something which has like I would not actually, it either works or it doesn't. Very like so that was the kind of harder part of computer science. I just like to express myself with code, but not this abstract logic.
Yeah, that's funny. And I'm going to imagine that probably, because I know you started Scaleform during your university years. Was that kind of like an outlet for you where you're like, I'm not really enjoying this abstract stuff. I just want to start like doing some like very hands-on, I mean, business building and practical, like in seeing your work like effectuate in practice. Is that like how did Scaleform like come to be?
Well, I was making these game engines in high school, so I wanted to make my own game engine, which would be like more out there in the world. And I met actually my first business partner, Brandon, across the dorms in college. So literally, we moved in, and we had this funny situation where they didn't have enough dorm space for all the freshmen they promised dorm space for. So they would put 3 people in the room instead of 2. But then over about 1 to 2 months, a few people don't show up or something, and they reshuffle people and they move you, they triple you. But the point is, when I was at my triple, Brendan, who basically became my best friend of life for 20 years and co-founder in a couple of companies, was across the hall. So I literally would walk across his place, and he was actually working in a real game company, in making like coding for games. And he was very also like business, energetic, enthusiastic. So I would come to him saying, well, let's make a game engine together. And he was busy. But long story short, a year later, we reunited and actually ended up deciding to start a company together. So we started making game engine tech. And back then, like, okay, so what I really wanted was to make this really accessible, flexible 3D engine where you could do everything visually on a computer. So you could like position objects, but you can do like a little bit logic. I mean, probably the easiest you do it, there's this known accessible engine now called Unity. So building something like that. So this was back in a long time ago. So I wanted to make that, but also naively wanted to make a lot of things from scratch. So Brandon like really got excited about this idea. We're gonna make a game engine. I didn't even want to make games. Maybe I wanted to make games eventually, but it would make this game engine and a studio so others can put games together visually and quickly. And one thing is when you're young, it's very easy to underestimate how long things take.
Yeah.
That's like you learn programming and you feel like you can figure it out and you start getting this creative stream and you can work these endless hours and things work. But still, you just set a task, something simple, and you logically in your mind, you have an idea how it should work. But actually having to do that just takes 4 times, 8 times longer. You can we're going to have this in a month, and it takes 3 months.
Yeah.
So we naively, when making this game studio, decided that we wanted to make our own user interface technology for the game engine we're going to do. Because, well, at the games, we were running mostly on Windows. And Windows, you really can't make it look like anything you want for a game. You can't like make it purple. You can't make it transparent or animated or any of that stuff. It's very structured. You can change a few colors. So we wanted to have a skinnable UI, which is really graphics and friendly with games. So we wanted to write our own graphics library and make our own UI. And once we make our own UI, we can use it to make a game studio in 3D, and then we'll have everything. So basically, write everything from scratch.
Yeah.
So before you make a game, why don't you first make Windows? So
That's funny.
Maybe 5 or 6 months in actually deep work, we realized that, we're kind of not progressing at the pace that we'd like. But so we had one more friend of mine join, Andrew. He was from the dorms who occasionally helped us. And we had this little office, which was an old bank with wires hanging from the ceiling. It literally was a guy from Pakistan who owned the building, rented it to us for like $200 a month or something.
Sweet.
It was a very shady place, honestly.
Yeah.
Had an old vault in the back. We kind of upgraded a year in, but we had a few computers in the corner, and we would just kind of worked from there for a while. So, long story short, we never got to actually making a game engine, but user interface system. We kind of first rewrote a whole widget library, tables, controls, scroll bars, windows, making it skinnable, which is sort of like rewriting Windows widget set. And then we ultimately realized, and we sold it to a few games. Civilization 4 was actually the first game.
Sweet.
Which used our UI. I don't know if you've heard of Civilization series.
Friends play it. We play a lot of Civ.
It was an awesome game.
Yeah.
You build your empire and everything. And then ultimately they realized that the market didn't quite need that type of UI, because a lot of games wanted animation. They wanted movement. They wanted dynamic screens, all these special effects. And Adobe Flash did that on the web. So we actually ended up re-implementing our Adobe Flash of our own with lots of tools and making the GPU accelerated at the time. So it was running 50 times faster. So you could actually put it on top of the game. And that really picked up on what made our first company. And
sweet.
Really, the journey is about 10 to 11 years of Scaleform. So the first 3 to 4 years, while still partially in college, just programming, having no customers, then getting a first few customers, pivoting, working for a few more years. And then the last 5 years is where our company really ramped up. And we had about 30 to 40 employees, and we had reasonable revenue, but that was kind of our first company experience.
That's amazing. And I think what really stood out to me is I love how it started with the university being we don't have enough space. We're just going to squish everyone in here. And it just so happens that you met your co-founder just across the hall. It's kind of those moments where sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right person can really just change the trajectory. And he said, he's your best friend, and you've ever since then, which is awesome to hear. And I can also empathize with underestimating how hard and how long things take. I think for us, right, Exceeder, when I was first starting Exceeder, I was lab equipment leasing. I was this has to be really simple. It's it has to be. And then fast forward, you're oh, wow, I've been working on this for a really long time. And there's if you just keep unpacking it, you're oh, there's intricacies that I did not anticipate. And I would not have known early on either. So I can empathize with that. And so as you guys were working in this bank, the bank with the bank vault, it sounded okay, you finally got some product that was ready to go and get some of your initial customers. Can you talk about how did you secure your first initial customers, and you mentioned that eventually you really started to get some momentum. When was that moment that you really got momentum?
We had the very first customer was Firaxis, who made Civilization. It was kind of a culmination of they wanted a really good UI, and we had this really flexible, skinnable UI. You could make it look like anything. So we sold it to them, and then we had to do a bunch of advising and consulting and actually coding. So the only code I actually wrote specifically for a game was probably in Civilization 4, because I have actually edited some of their screens to like arrange things.
Yeah.
And Brendan, the CEO, did it more because the company was literally like 3 of us.
Yeah.
So the CEO was doing more of the customer support and development. But we was kind of like a first contract, so ended up like maybe $30,000-$40,000 license for the tech, and like another 150,000 of contract consulting that we got. So we got like maybe 150,000-200,000 of this game, with us putting like 5 months as a team of actually do it. And Brendan looked at it and was like, you know what, this is really not scalable. And he looked at the emails. We had 140 support emails from this one product sale that we have had answer. We need to have a solution which requires less support. And that's kind of where he's decided, like, maybe we should pivot to something else. And he looked like at the Adobe Flash part. So we had a couple more customers on that particular technology, but it was just like a couple of small sales. But it also took a while, because you talk to people and they're like, we want animation. So, and some people would say it would be nice to have Flash in our game. So that's when Brandon came back to me. I was like, maybe we should pivot the company. And this is, there's like pivot the company as a startup after like 4 or 5 months. This is after 4 years of writing 150,000 lines of C++, so maybe 500,000 C++ that we wrote. So it's not like you're going to throw away so many years of your life, but we actually did. We found literally, there was an open source project out there, it was called GameSwift, and it was like a very small library. I think it was used for like one game, and a guy posted online, and we picked it up and just started making it really good and like improving it. And we posted it. I think Brennan already had a few connections with a company called Crytek, made a game called Crisis. It was a very big first-person shooter, phenomenal graphics. So I was trying to get them to use our animated UIs, which they ultimately agreed. And the agreement was that we give up the technology for free, but we'll provide like they'll pay us limited support, but they will, if they like it, they will say good stuff to the media. So we did that. And actually, they did make a few press releases, and as the game started coming about, like this is like a major studio who adopted us, other people were really willing to listen. So there was this one. So you fast forward a few more months, and our tech was very useful. It was nice for animating, but it had lots of problems. To be fair, it took us many months to make the Flash player good. Many years it is, but there was this one moment where there is a company called BioWare and make a lot of really good games. And at some point they called up because they saw an announcement about Crisis and they wanted Flash in the game. They talked to Brendan. He comes in and he talks to them. So you guys might want to use it. They're like, yeah, we'll get so he's like, do you want to get one license, or maybe for a couple games you want to try it? And they're like, we will get it for 10 games. And that was like a moment where suddenly had a business. So it's basically, because 10 games, I think, might be like, few 100,000, like for like maybe 300,000 to 400,000 or 2 to 3, depending on what capabilities they want. Like we charge per platform. Like if you have Xbox and PlayStation and PC, it's like 3 platforms versus just one. But that was like the moment where suddenly it clicked. Oh, so we can actually build a company there. And so we suddenly started ramping up. So in that year, we made $1 million in sales. And next year was like $1 million. But that's, I think, was probably 6th year or 5th year in the company's existence.
That's crazy. That's awesome. And I love that strategy, of like just being like, we're going to do this. Well, I don't know. I'm going to imagine it. I don't know how much it was a negotiation, or it was just like, you're going to take it or leave it. But just like, you're going to give it to us for free. And then we will be a reference for you. And so I don't know how much of a negotiation that was, but still, I think there's something there that's really fascinating is how impactful it can be to get that big logo to basically vouch for the product. And I can't imagine BioWare's doors would be open if you hadn't gotten the crisis kind of like stamp of approval. I remember trying to run Crisis on my PC, and my PC would just overheat because and the frames would just drop because I was like, I didn't have the latest like NVIDIA like graphics card. I was like, God, like my computer can't even run this thing. It's like about to blow up. So like, I always remembered Crysis being this kind of like known for having its like kind of looking really great. And awesome. That's as it was still three of you at that time when you got the BioWare deal.
No, by wire deal, there were probably like 8 or 10 people. So we had a family investor, which is Brendan's uncle, and he's dripped us like about $1.5 million over like 5 years. So there's like times where we didn't have money at all and times where we did, but like it literally was very intermittent. So
Interesting.
I think once we got Crisis and once we had the first Civilization customer, he gave us a bit more money incrementally from the first few $100K. But we were kind of struggling. But Brendan was basically collecting small checks from friends, family, and fools.
Yeah. I know the exact dance. But that's amazing to hear, and like what a awesome experience to, I think you learn a lot, even though it's like really hard shit. Like it's really hard, but you just learn so much through that experience. And when you talked about like kind of landing, with these big, these game makers, was it simply like, was this where you and Brandon are like knocking on studios' doors, or is it something where you like, is it like, did they find you? Or like, how did that connection, like how did BioWare get connected, or did you guys go hunt them down?
We would go to Game Developers Conference every year.
Got it.
And Brendan would reach out to all kind of speaking game people and would present, and we'd have a dog and pony show with a laptop. Here's our UI. Here's what would you use it in your game? So there's been a number of years of that.
Yep.
So I would say it was a lot of his effort. I participated. I answered questions. I did not do it. I was just programming.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'd like talk to the customer.
Yeah.
I mean, later I talked to customer, but more in the format of support and working with them tech. So I think in this case, I'm not sure, like because we was also press and some connections, so they could have reached out. But in practice, I would say a lot of it, big fraction was deals. And ultimately, we got a couple of people also doing sales full time after that deal. But in the beginning, it was just, I think, Brendan and us.
Cool. And I mean, I think, I'm a big gamer, so like I can like hearing these kind of like household names is kind of crazy. But also in the science, like it kind of works the same way in science. Like everyone just goes to a scientific conference and like you can kind of make these connections, which could make huge impacts like this. So that's awesome to hear. And, as you know, I know you eventually, there was an acquisition by Autodesk. Can you talk a little bit about, when did you know it was time to sell the company? And how did that, like, what was the lead up to that? And what was that experience like?
Like we were scaling for a while. I think it was a couple of years we were doubling. We had like $1 million revenue, then we had 2 million a year, then we had 4. And then there was this year we were about to get 6. So which was the last year. And there was like a crisis 2008, which happened in between. And we kind of had to let some people go, but it really wasn't because of the crisis, more than internal overhiring and mismanagement. But
Yeah.
so we kind of trimmed some managers and other things we did and just focused on engineering. But that kind of went well for us. But then there was a point where it was like this slowing down, and we realized, okay, now there's a lot of people who use it, and the market size is limited. We got to do something more. And I think Brendan, and we tried to also occasionally talk to VC. We got at some point a couple of term sheets, but they just were not good terms. So we just chose not to get it and grow organically. And there was a point where Brendan, probably more than me, thought that there's like a limit on how much we can grow this. And, we need to do something more significant. So, and there was Autodesk at the time had, so they have all the kind of top CAD. They have Maya, and I think that they also acquired another. They had a couple of top CAD packages, and they wanted to be in games. And they were concerned that Unreal Engine, which are building internal tools, would ultimately eat their lunch. So they wanted to have game tools. And they've already like acquired a couple of, I think there was like a physics technology and something else that they acquired. And so they were looking at the space, and ours at that point was starting to become the top user interface solution in the game industry. So there's probably hundreds of games that used us. It was basically you pick up Scaleform for UI, you pick up like Havoc for physics, you pick up what else was like at that time, I think it was like Miles or some Blink for video. Now it's probably something else. But there's this few top games everybody went to. So we kind of made that list, I would say, in the end of if you make a game and you want nice UI, this is where you go. So basically, Brendan talked to the leaders there and convinced them that if you want to grow and you want to have like a really great middleware suite, you might might be able to join forces and do it together. And that's kind of how it happened. And honestly, a negotiation for that took like 6 months. So it was like a moment where we were like, okay, we're probably going to do it. And after that, it kind of dragged on. So much so that I was able to move to a neighboring state when I knew that we're going to exit. So I could move to Virginia from Maryland. The funny part about that, but it ultimately closed. And we felt like we would be the biggest middleware in the group, and they could invest and do that. And sadly, they did not invest in us as much as was promised. That's how it often happens in those things.
Yeah. And so after the acquisition, you guys like basically stayed on for a little bit of time?
Yes. So like we weren't actually tied up because the technology was working and mature. So it was small, all cash deal. But ultimately, Brennan said, we're going to work with them. We're going to do everything. But then 3 months later, he got an offer from another startup. And it was like, Mike, I'm heading out. So 4 months later, I was running all of Scaleform. And stayed for about a year.
Totally. And so, after that year and Mike has now joined the startup, did you know what was on the horizon? Like what was up next for you? Or at that point where you're like, I got to figure this out?
The Autodesk, like they're a big company. I think they meant well, and I really like the game industry. But there's something about like the corporate structures. Once they acquired us, we were hoping for more resources and funding and marketing, but it didn't happen. Literally, we might have hired like one more engineer. So, and whatever revenue we're getting was kind of just over break even as a company. So we kind of supported the team on our own. So we had all these plans, but we kind of just kept operating as we have, but with more of these long, full conversations with my manager and discussions about the team and direction. I think I just remember being like, and the team which acquired us was in Montreal, so I would fly there occasionally, but mostly it would just be on a phone call. And I just felt these moments where it was even before Zoom. So it was just very kind of like, why am I in this call type of sensation.
Yeah.
But end of the day, there's a kind of kept it going and the team, but they didn't give us resources to actually grow. And they've actually cut the marketing because marketing was now as a part of their suite. So we used to have our own booth and our own presence and things. And that got cut down. So then they were surprised that there was no growth in business. Beyond that acquisition point, it was kind of just flat. I think we did one big deal with Nintendo or something, but that was it. I think that was probably one good thing about Autodesk is since our technology was so mature at that point, and the graphics engine so good, it's probably some of the best code I wrote in my life. The last 2 years before that was this vector graphics library. So the Nintendo, which is like very hard to actually get into Nintendo, it's a very respectable company to use middleware. And I think we got a big deal with them, which was like $1 or $2 million or something.
That's amazing.
Which was like a big win. But otherwise, it was kind of blah.
Yeah, totally. I was just like, especially with like, all the news that's coming out with like the Switch 2 and everything that's like, and how much they control, like Nintendo like loves their control. Is that is impressive as hell that you got them to kind of incorporate your creation. So that's like amazing. And I'm going to imagine like you went from Scaleform, your baby, kind of you and your best friends, and then go into a large organization. It's just like kind of a culture shock, I'm going to imagine. It's just like small organization with a lot of control, big organization, maybe with far less control. But you still landed Nintendo, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted us to go, so they supported like a big goal. But it was very hard to get any kind of headcount. So you have to basically convince now a number of managers and teams about the future of your own thing. So you had to play this remote political thing, and it's just not me.
Absolutely. So, you realize that, okay, this is not me. This is not my cup of tea. Did you know what was next? Were you like, maybe I'm going to go join Brandon at this startup? Or
Exactly. Well, I stayed for like a while because I also really cared about the team. There's things I wanted to finish. Things I wanted to do. But in the end of the day, I think Brendan called me up and was like, we're doing this great thing at this company called Gaikai, which is a cloud game streaming thing. You want to come join in? We could use a software architect. And I was considering it. And then a few more months passed by. And I think just around a year of our acquisition, I was like, okay, it's enough. I'm going to go join and try to do something else.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Biotech Startups Podcast with Michael Antonov. In part 2, we'll explore Michael's journey building Scaleform, the early challenges of scaling a startup, and how a chance meeting in college led to a co-founder partnership that would span decades. He also shares how Scaleform pivoted into an industry standard, what it was like navigating acquisition talks with Autodesk, and the early lessons that set the stage for founding Oculus. If you're enjoying the episode, follow the show, leave us a review, and share it with a friend. See you next time. The Biotech Startups Podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups Podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups Podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.